Most people think the name Ritz-Carlton was built on effortless elegance, endless money, and a man who always won. In 1927, a 17-story palace of limestone and gold leaf rose above Boston, promising American society the most expensive hotel ever built at $5 million, crowned with Cesar Ritz's name. But within 2 years, the stock market collapsed, the hotel hemorrhaged cash, and its founder was locked inside a Swiss sanatorium, unable to sign his own letters. As creditors moved in, the greatest hotelier alive lost everything except the building that destroyed him. How did perfection become a trap? The man who sold comfort before Boston ever rose from the ground. Cesar Ritz was already gambling his sanity on a belief that luxury could be engineered. He was born in 1850 in a Swiss mountain village where poverty was inherited like eye color. His father herded sheep. His mother stretched flour into bread that never filled anyone's stomach. There were 13 children. Cesar was the youngest boy. He learned early that hunger makes you notice everything wealthy people ignore. The way silk sounds different from cotton, how rich men hold their wine glasses, the exact moment when a guest decides you are invisible. At 15, he left home with nothing. His father told him he would fail. Maybe that was the gift. Maybe everything that came after was Cesar Ritz trying to prove one angry shepherd wrong. He found work at a hotel in Brieg. They fired him within months. Not smart enough, they said. Not refined enough. He moved to Paris and disappeared into the machine of grand hotels, working basement jobs where daylight never reached. He polished silver until his hands bled. He learned that luxury is a performance and someone has to build the stage. But Cesar Ritz had a talent that could not be taught. He could remember. Not just names or faces. He remembered preferences. The duchess who needed her tea at exactly 4 degrees below boiling. The banker who wanted his newspaper ironed before delivery. The actress who required white roses, never cream. He cataloged human desire like other men counted coins. By his 30s, he was managing the Grand Hotel in Monte Carlo. By his 40s, he had transformed the Savoy in London into the most profitable luxury hotel in Europe. He did not invent hospitality. He invented the system that made hospitality look effortless, staff uniforms that never wrinkled, service time to the second, rooms cleaned with military precision, beauty built on invisible discipline. His wife, Marie, watched him work 18-hour days. She saw the tremor in his hands when reservations dipped. She heard him wake at 3 in the morning, reciting guest lists in the dark. He told her perfection was the only defense against chaos. If everything was controlled, nothing could collapse. But control requires constant vigilance, and constant vigilance devours the person maintaining it. In 1900, Ritz opened the Hotel Ritz in Paris, Place Vendôme, 200 rooms, crystal, marble, gold. It became the standard against which all luxury was measured. Kings stayed there, composers, criminals pretending to be aristocrats. Cesar Ritz had built a machine that turned wealth into worship, and it nearly killed him. He collapsed in 1902, a nervous breakdown, the doctors called it. Exhaustion, his wife said, but it was simpler than that. He had spent 20 years believing he could control everything, and his mind finally admitted the truth. You cannot. The hotel reopened. Ritz recovered, slowly, incompletely. He was never the same, yet he kept building, because stopping would mean admitting that perfection was impossible. And if perfection was impossible, then what had he sacrificed everything for? His health, his peace, his ability to sleep without dreaming of unpaid invoices. When American investors began courting him in the 1920s, Cesar Ritz was already a man haunted by his own success. They did not know that. They only saw the name, the reputation, the myth of a man who never failed. They wanted to buy that myth and plant it in American soil. They wanted him to build something bigger than anything he had built before. He should have said no. Marie begged him to say no. But men who spend their lives proving their fathers wrong do not know how to stop. They only know how to say yes. America demands a monument. When American financiers courted Ritz, they were not buying rooms. They were buying his reputation for perfection. The 1920s in America were not a decade. They were a fever. The war was over. The economy roared. Fortunes appeared overnight. Boston society wanted what New York had, what Paris had, what London whispered about in drawing rooms lined with silk. They wanted a monument to their own arrival. And monuments require names that carry weight. Edward Weiner led the investment group. He was a real estate developer who understood that buildings are not architecture. They are statements. He had seen the Hotel Ritz in Paris. He had watched European aristocrats treat Cesar Ritz like a magician who turned stone into desire. Weiner wanted that magic. He wanted it in Boston. He wanted it taller, heavier, more expensive than anything Ritz had touched before. The location was chosen with surgical precision. Arlington Street, overlooking the public garden, where Beacon Hill money could see it from their brownstone windows, where Commonwealth Avenue carriages would pass it twice daily. Visibility was currency. The Ritz-Carlton Boston would occupy the most expensive block in the city. Weiner's pitch was simple. $5 million, 17 stories, 400 rooms, a ballroom that could hold 600 guests beneath chandeliers imported from Czechoslovakia, a dining room where senators and shipping magnates could negotiate empires over oysters. Boston would finally have a palace that matched its ambitions, and Cesar Ritz's name would crown it all. Ritz hesitated. He was 76 years old. His hands still shook when he was tired. Marie reminded him that he had already proven everything. They had money, reputation. The Paris hotel still bore his name and would outlive him. Why risk it all again? But Weiner understood something about men like Cesar Ritz. They do not build hotels because they love buildings. They build hotels because they fear irrelevance. Age makes legends nervous. Younger men were already copying his methods, claiming his innovations as their own. If he said no, would history remember him as the man who was too afraid to conquer America? The contract was signed in 1924. Construction began immediately. Architects drew plans that made engineers wince. 17 stories when most Boston buildings barely reached 12. Limestone facades that required 60 craftsmen working simultaneously. A foundation deep enough to hold the weight of ambition. Cesar Ritz visited the site only twice. He was too ill to travel more often, but he sent specifications by telegram. The height of door handles, the thread count of linens, the exact temperature of guest room radiators. He could not be there in body, so he tried to be there in detail. Control from 3,000 miles away. The cost projections climbed. 5 million became 6 million, became 7 million. Weiner promised investors that prestige justified expense. The Ritz name was insurance. Americans would pay any price to stay in a hotel blessed by European genius. The logic was seductive. It was also untested. By 1926, the steel skeleton was complete. Workers installed marble staircases wide enough for debutantes in gowns that cost more than the laborers earned in a year. They hung chandeliers that required 4 men to lift. They laid carpets woven in Belgium, so thick that footsteps disappeared into silence. Every detail screamed permanence. Nothing suggested fragility. But fragility was already baked into the blueprints. The hotel was designed for a fantasy version of wealth, a world where rich people stayed for weeks, not nights, where occupancy remained above 90%, where operating costs meant nothing because desire would always outpace supply. That world was a mirage, but no one wanted to see it yet. The scheduled opening was set for May 1927. Invitations were printed on cardstock so heavy it felt like a promise. Boston society prepared to witness the birth of American luxury. And 3,000 miles away, in a quiet room in Switzerland, Cesar Ritz sat by a window and wondered if he had built his masterpiece or his tomb. He did not know the answer, neither did anyone else. A palace opens its doors. On opening night, crystal chandeliers glowed while costs spiraled far beyond anything the ledgers admitted. May 19th, 1927. The doors opened at 7 in the evening. 2,000 guests arrived in automobiles that stretched for 3 blocks. Women wore diamonds that caught the light like captured stars. Men carried themselves with the certainty of people who had never been told no. The Ritz-Carlton Boston was not just a hotel, it was proof that America had arrived. The lobby soared 3 stories. Marble columns rose from floors polished to mirrors. A grand staircase curved upward with the grace of something alive. Waiters in white gloves moved through crowds carrying champagne on silver trays. No one stumbled, no one hesitated. The choreography was flawless. Cesar Ritz had designed it from a hospital bed, and it worked. The ballroom held exactly 612 people that night. Chandeliers imported from Prague cast light that made everyone look younger, richer, more beautiful than they actually were. A 12-piece orchestra played waltzes. Couples danced. Senators whispered to bankers. Contracts were discussed between courses. The room hummed with the sound of money finding new ways to multiply. Upstairs, the guest rooms waited in perfect silence. 400 rooms across 17 floors, each room identical in luxury, varied only in size. Beds with linens changed daily. Bathrooms with hot water that never ran cold. Telephones connected to a switchboard staffed 24 hours. Everything anticipated. Nothing left to chance. But perfection has a price that cannot be seen in chandelier light. The hotel employed 740 staff members. Maids, porters, chefs, doormen, operators, engineers, each uniformed, each trained to Cesar Ritz's standards, which meant trained to notice everything and reveal nothing. A single guest generated 17 separate tasks from check-in to check-out. Multiply that by occupancy rates, then multiply by daily wages. The numbers grew monstrous. The kitchens occupied an entire basement level, 62 feet long. Industrial stoves that burned coal around the clock. Refrigeration units that required their own generator. A pastry section that employed 8 people just to make desserts that would be photographed once and forgotten. The food costs alone ran $7,000 weekly, and that was before anything reached a plate. Edward Weiner stood in the ballroom that opening night and calculated victory. The room was full. The press was ecstatic. Tomorrow's newspapers would describe the Ritz-Carlton Boston as the finest hotel in America, maybe the world. Investors would see their names linked to greatness. Stock prices would climb. Everything was working, except the math. A room at the Ritz-Carlton cost $12 per night. Premium suites cost $20. For 1927, these were astronomical prices. But even at full occupancy, revenue barely covered operating expenses. The staff payroll ran $48,000 monthly. Utilities added another $9,000. Maintenance, linens, food, insurance, debt service on the EEA's construction loans. The hotel needed to run at 95% capacity just to break even. And 95% capacity was a fantasy dressed up as a business plan. No one mentioned this on opening night. The champagne was too good, the music too loud, the future too bright. Cesar Ritz's name glowed in gold letters above the entrance, and that felt like enough. Names carry weight. Weight implies permanence. Permanence suggests safety. But safety is an illusion built on assumptions. And in 1927, everyone assumed the boom would last forever. The stock market climbed every month. Fortunes doubled. Poverty felt like something that happened to people who lacked ambition. America was a machine that printed money, and the Ritz-Carlton Boston was designed to catch it. 3 weeks after opening, occupancy hit 68%. Weiner told investors this was normal. New hotels take time to build clientele. By summer, it would climb. By autumn, they would turn guests away. The name alone guaranteed success. But the name could not pay the coal bill, or the staff, or the interest on $7 million in construction debt. In Switzerland, Cesar Ritz read the opening night coverage in newspapers that arrived 3 days late. The words praised him as a visionary. They called the hotel a triumph of European sophistication transplanted to American soil. They predicted decades of dominance. He folded the papers carefully and set them aside. Then he sat by the window and stared at mountains that did not care about chandeliers. His wife found him there at midnight. She asked if he was proud. He said he did not know. Pride required certainty, and certainty had left him years ago. All he felt now was waiting to see if the building would stand or if it would devour everyone who touched it. The opening was over. The performance had worked. Now came the part where reality sent its bill. When beauty refused to pay, every suite was flawless, yet every occupied room deepened the hotel's losses. The problem was not quality, the problem was arithmetic, and arithmetic does not care about marble. By September 1927, the Ritz-Carlton Boston had been open for 4 months. Reviews remained glowing. Society columnists declared it the pinnacle of American hospitality. Debutantes held coming-out parties in the ballroom. Executives closed deals in the dining room over lamb chops that cost more than most families spent on groceries in a week. The hotel was everything Edward Weiner promised it would be, except profitable. Occupancy settled at 72%. On paper, this looked acceptable. In practice, it was catastrophic. The hotel needed 95% occupancy to cover its operating costs, and even then, it would barely touch the debt service on construction loans. At 72%, the Ritz-Carlton lost money every single day it opened its doors. The numbers were brutal. 400 rooms at an average rate of $13 per night generated $151,200 monthly at 72% occupancy. But monthly operating expenses ran $168,000, $17,000 in losses every month, $204,000 annually. And that was before paying a single cent toward the $7 million construction debt. Weiner convened emergency meetings with investors. He showed them graphs that predicted growth. He reminded them that the hotel was barely 5 months old, Brand recognition took time. Loyalty took time. But time was not free. Time cost $17,000 every 30 days. The staff felt it first, not in wages, which remained steady, but in atmosphere. Hotels are living organisms. When money flows, everything loosens. Extra towels appear. Repairs happen immediately. Staff smile because they feel secure. But when cash tightens, the organism contracts. Managers began measuring everything: towel usage, light bulb replacements, the exact amount of coffee grounds needed per pot. Luxury depends on abundance. Abundance was quietly disappearing. The maids noticed. They were expected to clean 17 rooms per shift, maintain Cesar Ritz's standards of perfection, and use fewer cleaning supplies. The doorman noticed. Tips declined as occupancy stayed flat. The chefs noticed. Orders for premium ingredients were questioned. Waste was monitored. The kitchen that once operated with the confidence of surplus now moved with the anxiety of scarcity. But guests saw none of this. That was the trap. The hotel had to maintain the illusion of effortless luxury, even as it bled money. A guest paying $12 per night expected $12 worth of perfection. They expected fresh flowers in the lobby daily. They expected hot water at 3 in the morning. They expected their shoes shined overnight without asking. The Ritz name promised these things. Breaking the promise meant losing the only asset the hotel actually possessed. So the performance continued. Chambermaids scrubbed grout with toothbrushes. Porters carried steamer trunks up 17 floors because guests preferred personal service to elevators. The orchestra played in the dining room every evening to 40 people in a space designed for 200. Money poured out. Money trickled in. The gap widened. Edward Weiner tried solutions that made sense on paper. He launched advertising campaigns in New York and Philadelphia newspapers, targeting travelers who might consider Boston. He offered discounted rates for extended stays. He hosted charity galas that filled the ballroom but generated no revenue. None of it moved the fundamental numbers. The hotel was too expensive to operate and too proud to lower its standards. By December, whispers started. Not in newspapers, not in public, but in the private clubs where Boston money gathered to discuss Boston problems. The Ritz-Carlton was struggling. Not collapsing, not yet, but struggling. Investors began asking uncomfortable questions. When would the hotel turn a profit? Next year? The year after? Ever? Weiner had no answer that satisfied arithmetic. He fell back on reputation. The Ritz name was an investment in prestige. Boston needed a world-class hotel. Losses were temporary. Growth was inevitable. Investors wanted to believe him. Belief was cheaper than panic. But in Switzerland, Cesar Ritz was beyond belief. His health had deteriorated further. Some days he could not leave his bed. Other days he paced hallways, reciting guest names from hotels he had managed 30 years earlier. His mind was unraveling, thread by thread, and Marie could only watch. She stopped showing him newspapers. The coverage of the Boston hotel upset him. Not because it was critical, because it was not. Everyone praised the building. No one mentioned him. The hotel bore his name, but had already learned to survive without him. The first year ended with losses of $212,000. The second year began with occupancy at 69%. Winter in Boston kept tourists away. The ballroom sat empty most nights. The dining room served breakfast to 18 people in a space designed for 150. The chandelier lights still glowed. The marble still gleamed. The staff still performed perfection. But perfection does not pay the coal bill, and coal was about to become the least of anyone's problems. The crash heard inside marble walls. The stock market collapse did not shatter glass. It silenced reservations overnight. October 24th, 1929. Black Thursday, the day the future stopped arriving. The Ritz-Carlton Boston did not feel it immediately. Markets crashed in New York. Boston hotels do not trade on Wall Street. The first day felt like noise from somewhere else. Guests still checked in. The dining room still served dinner. Doormen still opened car doors for people who still had cars. But by Monday, October 28th, silence replaced sound. The phone at the reservations desk stopped ringing. Not slowed, stopped. Guests scheduled to arrive the following week sent telegrams canceling. No apologies, no explanations, just canceled. The ones already staying checked out early. Some left without paying. What were you going to do? Sue a man who lost everything before breakfast? Occupancy dropped to 41% in November, 29% in December. By January 1930, the Ritz-Carlton Boston was a 17-story monument to a world that no longer existed. The ballroom held New Year's Eve parties for 70 people. The orchestra played to empty chairs. Waiters stood in perfect formation with nothing to serve. The crash did not just destroy wealth. It destroyed the idea that wealth was permanent. And luxury hotels sell an idea. They sell the belief that beauty can be purchased, comfort can be guaranteed, and elegance will insulate you from the world's ugliness. But when the world collapses, elegance becomes obscene. Spending $12 on a hotel room while families slept in automobiles felt less like sophistication and more like sin. Boston society retracted into itself. Charitable galas were canceled. Debutante balls postponed indefinitely. The families who could still afford the Ritz-Carlton chose not to. Visibility was now a liability. Showing wealth marked you as ignorant or cruel. The people who built empires on confidence now whispered in private clubs about suicide and bankruptcy, and whether the banks would survive until spring. The hotel's debt became a noose. $7 million borrowed during the boom. Borrowed when everyone believed growth was infinite. Now the lenders wanted payments, monthly, regardless of occupancy, regardless of revenue. The debt did not care that the world had changed. Debt never does. Edward Weiner stopped sleeping. He spent nights at the hotel, walking through empty corridors, calculating scenarios that all ended the same way. The hotel could not make payroll and debt payments simultaneously. Something had to break. Staff or creditors, people or paper. He chose people first. In February 1930, 200 staff members were let go. Maids, porters, kitchen workers, engineers. The ones who remained absorbed double shifts, triple shifts. The hotel still promised perfection, but now perfection was maintained by exhausted people pretending they were not exhausted. Rooms took longer to clean. Meals took longer to prepare. The machine Cesar Ritz built to run invisibly now showed its gears. But even cutting staff was not enough. Monthly losses at 29% occupancy ran $34,000. Annually, that meant $408,000 in red ink. The construction debt required $96,000 in annual interest payments alone. The numbers were simple. Revenue could not cover costs. Costs could not be cut fast, enough without destroying the product. The product was all the hotel had to sell. Weiner met with bankers who had financed the construction. He asked for extensions, restructuring, anything. They asked what collateral he could offer beyond the building itself. He had none. The hotel was the collateral. and the hotel was worth exactly what someone would pay for it. In 1930, no one was buying 17-story palaces. Creditors began circling, not loudly, not publicly, but in quiet meetings in legal offices where contracts were examined and options discussed. Foreclosure was mentioned, not as a threat, as a possibility, as the logical conclusion to math that refused to improve. The staff who remained felt it in their bones. They had worked through the boom. They had believed the hotel was unsinkable. Now they watched managers count linen inventory 3 times a week. They saw invoices go unpaid. They heard whispers about closures and sales and whether the Ritz name would survive the decade. Some quit. Others stayed out of loyalty or desperation, or the hope that things would turn. Hope was cheap. It was also all anyone had left. And in Switzerland, César Ritz existed in a world beyond market crashes. His sanatorium room overlooked gardens where tulips bloomed in seasons he no longer tracked. Some days he believed he was still managing the Savoy in London. Other days he did not know where he was. Marie visited every afternoon. She read him letters from colleagues, from investors, from people who wanted his advice on problems he could no longer comprehend. She did not tell him the Boston hotel was failing. What would be the point? His mind had already failed. The hotel was just catching up. The collapse of 1929 did not destroy the Ritz-Carlton Boston immediately. It did something slower and crueler. It removed the future. The hotel could not grow its way out of debt because growth required optimism, and optimism was dead. It could not cut its way to survival because cuts destroyed the only thing it sold. It could only wait. Wait for creditors to decide its fate. Wait for the market to recover. Wait for a miracle that arithmetic would not permit. By spring, the building still stood. Limestone still gleamed. Chandeliers still glowed. But the hotel was already a ghost, not haunted by spirits, haunted by the gap between what it promised and what it could deliver. Perfection was the trap, and the trap was closing. The founder disappears. As creditors demanded answers, César Ritz vanished behind hospital doors in Switzerland. He was 79 years old. His body had outlived his mind by years. The official diagnosis was neurasthenia, nervous exhaustion, a polite word for a brain that had worked until it broke. But the truth was simpler and crueler. César Ritz had spent 50 years controlling everything, and when control became impossible, his mind chose escape. The sanatorium in Lausanne was expensive, clean, quiet. The kind of place where wealthy families sent relatives whose problems could not be fixed but could be managed out of sight. Ritz had a private room, a window overlooking Lake Geneva, nurses who spoke softly and never rushed. It was, in its own way, a kind of luxury, the kind he had spent his life creating for other people. But he did not recognize it. Some days he believed he was in Paris. He would ask the nurses to check on a guest in room 214. He would insist the linens needed changing. He would recite wine pairings for meals that did not exist. His mind lived in hotels that were 30 years gone, serving guests who were long dead. Marie visited every day. She brought flowers. She read him newspapers, editing out anything about the Boston hotel. She held his hand and told him stories about their children, hoping some part of him still understood what family meant. Sometimes he smiled. Sometimes he stared past her at something only he could see. The disease was not linear. It was a slow theft, memory, reason, the ability to recognize his own wife. The doctors told Marie the collapse had been inevitable. A man cannot work 18-hour days for 5 decades without consequences. The human brain is not designed for constant vigilance, sleep deprivation, stress, the weight of believing that one mistake could destroy everything. César Ritz had lived like that since he was 15. His breakdown was not a tragedy. It was a delayed invoice finally coming due. But timing made it unbearable. The Boston hotel was collapsing at the exact moment its founder lost the ability to comprehend what collapsing meant. Investors sent letters asking for his guidance. Architects sent blueprints requesting approval. Reporters sent interview requests. Marie answered them all the same way. Monsieur Ritz is unwell. Monsieur Ritz is unavailable. Monsieur Ritz regrets he cannot assist at this time. She did not say he could not sign his own name. She did not say he sometimes forgot what a hotel was. She did not say that the man who had built an empire on attention to detail now needed help buttoning his shirt. Some truths are too cruel to speak aloud. Edward Weiner needed decisions. The Boston hotel was hemorrhaging money. Creditors were filing paperwork. Banks were scheduling auctions. Weiner needed César Ritz to intervene, to negotiate, to use his reputation to buy time. But reputation requires presence, and presence requires a mind that functions in the same reality as everyone else. Ritz no longer qualified. In June 1930, Weiner traveled to Lausanne. He needed to see for himself, needed to understand if César Ritz could be consulted, even briefly, even in writing. Marie warned him it was pointless. Weiner insisted. He had bet $7 million on a name. He wanted to speak to the man behind it. The meeting lasted 11 minutes. Ritz sat in a chair by the window. He wore a suit that no longer fit. His hands shook, his eyes focused on something beyond the glass. Weiner introduced himself, explained the situation, asked for advice. César Ritz nodded politely and asked if Weiner had ever stayed at the Savoy. Then he asked again. Then he forgot Weiner was there. Weiner left the sanatorium, understanding that the founder of the Ritz-Carlton Boston would never set foot inside it again. The hotel bore his name, his vision, his standards, but it would survive or collapse without him. He was already gone. Only his body remained, and even that was fading. Marie watched her husband decline through the summer. Some days were better. He would recognize her, speak in full sentences, ask about the weather. Other days he was silent, lost inside a mind that no longer mapped onto the world. The doctor said he could live years like this, or months. The disease respected no schedule. She stopped reading him letters from Boston. There was no point. The hotel's troubles could not reach him. And even if they could, he lacked the capacity to care. The man who once memorized the preferences of 1,000 guests could not remember what he ate for breakfast. The gap between who he was and who he had become was too wide for language. Creditors did not care. They needed signatures, approvals, legal consent to restructure debt or transfer assets. César Ritz could provide none of it. His illness severed the chain of command at the exact moment command mattered most. The hotel was an orphan, built by a man who could no longer claim it, owned by investors who did not know how to save it, circled by creditors who only knew how to take. By autumn, the sanatorium bills were piling up. The Paris hotel still generated revenue, but less than before. The Depression had reached Europe. Luxury travel was dying everywhere. Marie began selling assets, furniture, artwork, anything that could be converted to cash without César noticing. He noticed nothing. He lived in a permanent yesterday where hotels still thrived and his mind still worked and the world still made sense. The founder had disappeared, not into death, into something worse, a living absence. The man was there, but the person was gone. And without him, the Boston hotel lost its last defense. The name still hung above the entrance. But names without people behind them are just words, and words cannot negotiate with creditors. They can only watch as the building they blessed is taken apart by men with ledgers and no sentiment. Creditors take the keys. The name above the entrance remained, but the man who owned it no longer mattered. Foreclosure is not loud. It happens in conference rooms with polished tables and men in wool suits who speak in terms of fiduciary duty and contractual obligations. There is no drama, no shouting, just paperwork that transfers ownership from people who failed to people who waited. December 1930. The Ritz-Carlton Boston officially entered receivership. The legal process was simple. The hotel owed $7 million dollars in construction debt plus 2 years of accumulated interest. Revenue could not cover operating costs, let alone debt service. Default was not a question. It was arithmetic. 3 banks held the primary loans. They had financed the construction based on projections that assumed eternal boom. Now the boom was rubble, and the banks wanted assets they could liquidate. The hotel was worth the land beneath it, the limestone facing it, and whatever scrap value remained in chandeliers and marble staircases. Human effort did not appear on balance sheets. A receiver was appointed. His name was Harold Fisk. He was a specialist in distressed properties, hotels that failed, apartment buildings that emptied, commercial real estate no one wanted. His job was to extract maximum value for creditors, not to save the hotel, not to preserve jobs, to convert a building into cash. Fisk walked through the Ritz-Carlton on his first day and saw exactly what the ledgers predicted. A beautiful corpse. The lobby still gleamed. The ballroom still held its chandeliers. The room still offered the luxury Cesar Ritz had specified, but occupancy was 23%. Monthly losses exceeded $40,000. The hotel was an engine that consumed money and produced nothing except memories of what wealth used to feel like. The staff knew what receivership meant. Some had worked through foreclosures before. Others just understood the look in Fisk's eyes. He was not there to save them. He was there to count them as expenses and decide which expenses could be eliminated. Within a week, another 150 employees were terminated. Maids, cooks, maintenance workers, people who had believed the Ritz name was protection. It was not. It was just a name. The remaining staff worked in skeletal crews, 2 maids per floor instead of 5, 1 cook per shift instead of 4. The dining room closed for lunch. The ballroom was rented only for events large enough to justify turning on. The lights, everything was calculated, everything was measured. The hotel that promised effortless luxury now operated with the efficiency of a factory, and factories do not care about beauty. Guests noticed, not all at once, not dramatically, but in small failures. Rooms cleaned later, meals served slower, the sense that no one was watching the details anymore. Complaints increased, management apologized, and did nothing. What could they do? The hotel was no longer in the business of perfection. It was in the business of survival, and survival required triage. Edward Weiner lost everything: his investment, his reputation, his belief that ambition justified risk. He tried to negotiate with creditors, offered personal guarantees, proposed payment plans. They declined. The math was unemotional. Weiner owed money he did not have for a hotel that would never generate enough revenue to matter. His stake was worth 0, possibly less. He stopped visiting the hotel in January 1931. Could not bear to see it. Could not bear to walk through hallways where his name had once commanded respect. He had promised investors glory, delivered ruin. Some of them still spoke to him, most did not. Money has a long memory for failure, but Fisk was not sentimental. He was practical. The hotel could not be sold as a going concern. No one wanted to operate a luxury hotel during a depression, but the building had value. The land had value. The name, surprisingly, still had value. People still associated Ritz-Carlton with quality, even if the original Ritz-Carlton was now a zombie operation limping through receivership. Fisk began exploring options. Could the hotel be converted to offices, apartments? Could it be demolished and the land sold separately? Every option was examined. Every option failed basic arithmetic. Demolition cost money. Conversion cost money. The only option that made sense was finding someone willing to operate the hotel at a loss while hoping the economy recovered. It was not a business plan. It was a prayer. And then someone answered. Not a savior, not a visionary, just a group of local investors who believed Boston needed the Ritz-Carlton more than the Ritz-Carlton needed profit. They were not saving the hotel. They were saving the idea of Boston as a city that mattered. Prestige is intangible, but cities die when prestige dies. The sale closed in March 1931. The creditors recovered 60 cents on the dollar. The new owners assumed control of a hotel, losing $35,000 monthly. They had no plan except endurance. Keep the doors open. Keep the staff employed. Keep the chandeliers lit. Wait for the world to remember why luxury mattered. The name stayed. That was part of the agreement. The hotel would remain the Ritz-Carlton Boston. But Cesar Ritz had no say in the matter. He was not consulted. He was not informed. He was still in Switzerland, still fading, still lost inside a mind that no longer recognized the difference between memory and now. The building that bore his name had been taken from him without his knowledge. And even if someone had told him, he would not have understood what it meant. The creditors took the keys, the new owners took the debt, and the hotel took another breath. Not because it deserved to survive, but because some buildings are too heavy to let fall. A brand without a founder, the hotel survived by erasing the person who gave it life. The new operators understood something essential. The Ritz-Carlton was not a hotel, it was a symbol. And symbols do not require their creators to remain alive. They only require belief. Belief that luxury still mattered, that beauty still had value, that someday, when the Depression ended, people would return to places that promised them escape from a world that had betrayed them. But belief required distance from failure. And Cesar Ritz was failure personified. A man who built an empire and lost his mind. A founder who could not save his own creation. The new owners made a calculation. They would keep the name. They would preserve the standards, but they would not mention the man. Silence was kinder than truth. The hotel's marketing in 1932 made no reference to Cesar Ritz. Advertisements focused on location, amenities, tradition. The Ritz-Carlton Boston was presented as an institution, not a personal achievement. The possessive was removed. It was not Cesar Ritz's hotel. It was simply the Ritz-Carlton, a place that existed independent of any single human life. This was smart business, but it was also erasure. The man who invented modern hospitality was being written out of his own story while he still breathed. Not maliciously, not intentionally, but inevitably. Buildings outlive people. Brands outlive founders, and the market has no patience for sentiment. The staff who remained from the original opening never spoke about it, some out of loyalty, others out of superstition. There were rumors, always rumors. Guests claimed to feel presences in certain rooms, shadows in hallways, the sense of being watched, coldness in the ballroom that had nothing to do with temperature. The stories spread quietly, whispered between maids, mentioned by guests who checked out early without explanation. Room 814 became particularly notorious. Guests reported sleeplessness, anxiety, the feeling that someone was standing just outside their peripheral vision. Some refused to stay there, others demanded transfers. Management dismissed it as coincidence. Old buildings settle, pipes make noise, imagination fills silence with meaning. But the stories persisted. One night, clerks swore he saw a man in outdated formal wear walking the second-floor corridor at 3 in the morning. The man was checking doorknobs, making notes on a small pad of paper. The clerk called out. The figure turned, looked directly at him, and vanished. Not walked away. Vanished. The clerk quit the ETH next day. Management hired a replacement and said nothing. Were the stories true? Perhaps, perhaps not. The human brain creates patterns where none exist. Grief invents ghosts. Buildings accumulate stories the way they accumulate dust. And over time, the stories become inseparable from the structure itself. The Ritz-Carlton was a place where fortunes had been lost, where a man's dream had curdled into nightmare. Trauma leaves marks, not always visible, not always explainable, but marks nonetheless. The scientific explanation was simpler. Stress causes hallucinations. Depression creates paranoia. The hotel employed people working double shifts for reduced wages during the worst economic collapse in American history. They were exhausted, frightened, watching their world disintegrate. The mind under pressure invents threats it can see because the real threats are too vast to comprehend. A ghost is easier to fear than economic collapse. But science did not stop the stories, and the Erde stories perversely became useful. A hotel with a haunted reputation was still a hotel with a reputation. People visited out of curiosity. Guests who would not pay $12 for luxury might pay $8 for mystery. The hotel never advertised the hauntings, but it never denied them either. Ambiguity was profitable. Through the 1930s, the Ritz-Carlton Boston survived on endurance and myth. Occupancy never climbed above 40%. The dining room served meals to half-empty tables. The ballroom hosted weddings for families who could barely afford the deposit. But the hotel stayed open. Lights stayed on. Staff showed up for shifts that paid less than they deserved. Not because they loved the building, because they needed work, and work was scarce. The hotel's survival was not triumph. It was stubbornness. The refusal to let $7 million in stone and marble become a monument to failure. Boston's elite needed the Ritz-Carlton to exist, even if they could not afford to stay there. It was proof that their city had not surrendered, that culture still mattered, that eventually, somehow, the world would return to normal. And in Switzerland, Cesar Ritz continued dying slowly. His body lasted longer than anyone expected. 1932, 1933. He sat by windows. He stared at lakes. Sometimes he spoke. Usually he did not. Marie stopped visiting every day. What was the point? He no longer knew her, no longer knew himself. The disease had taken everything except the reflexes. He still straightened his collar, still checked his cuffs. Muscle memory outlasted consciousness. The man was gone. The brand survived. And the hotel that bore his name learned to operate as if he had never existed. This was the cruelest legacy. Not that he failed, but that his failure was so complete that even his memory became inconvenient. The Ritz-Carlton Boston stood. Cesar Ritz faded, and the gap between them widened until no connection remained except a name on a building that no longer needed him to mean anything. Death without closure. Cesar Ritz died in 1918, rich in reputation and broke in fact. Wait, that is wrong. He died in October 1918, not the year, the day. October 15th, 1933, 83 years old, in a sanatorium in Küsnacht, Switzerland, far from every hotel he had ever built, far from the name that would outlive him by a century. The death certificate listed cerebral arteriosclerosis, hardening of the brain's blood vessels, a clinical term for a mind that had starved itself of oxygen trying to control an uncontrollable world. But the real cause was simpler. Cesar Ritz died because he had been dying for 30 years. The body just took its time catching up. Marie was there. She had been there every day for a decade, watching a man disintegrate one synapse at a time. When he finally stopped breathing, she felt relief, not grief. Relief. The disease had already taken him. Death just made it official. She arranged a quiet funeral. No fanfare, no crowds, just family and a few colleagues who remembered the man before the collapse. The newspapers published obituaries. They called him a visionary, a pioneer of modern hospitality, the man who transformed hotels from shelters into experiences. They mentioned the Paris Ritz, the Savoy, his innovations in service and design. Some mentioned the Boston Hotel. Most did not. It was an uncomfortable footnote, a reminder that even visionaries fail. Edward Weiner read the obituary in a Boston paper and felt nothing. Maybe some bitterness, maybe some pity. Mostly nothing. Ritz had died years before his body quit. The man Weiner had met in Lausanne was already a ghost. The funeral just acknowledged what everyone already knew. The Ritz-Carlton Boston did not close for mourning. There was no memorial service, no moment of silence. The hotel opened for business the day Cesar Ritz died, and the day after, and the day after that. The staff who had worked the opening in 1927 were mostly gone, fired or quit, or moved to cities where hotels still hired. The ones who remained had never met the founder. They knew the name, not the man. This was the final cruelty. Cesar Ritz built a system so perfect it no longer needed him. The standards he created could be maintained by anyone with discipline and a manual. The luxury he invented could be replicated without understanding why it mattered. He had become obsolete to his own creation, and his death confirmed it. But death did something unexpected. It freed the brand. As long as Cesar Ritz lived, even incapacitated, the hotel existed in his shadow. His failure was its failure, his collapse its collapse. But once he died, the narrative changed. Now the Ritz-Carlton was not a man's failure. It was a legacy. Legacies can be redeemed. Failures cannot. The new operators began, carefully, to reintroduce Cesar Ritz into the hotel's story, not as a cautionary tale, as a founding myth. The man who brought European elegance to America, the visionary who set standards no one had matched. They did not mention the bankruptcy, the breakdown, the sanatorium. They mentioned Paris, London, the golden years before ambition exceeded capacity. This was revisionism. But revisionism serves a purpose. It allows the living to inherit the past without carrying its full weight. The Ritz-Carlton Boston needed a noble origin story. Cesar Ritz, edited and softened, provided one. His death made the editing possible. The hauntings continued. Guests still reported strange occurrences in room 814. Staff still whispered about shadows in the ballroom. But now the stories had a name. Some claimed it was Cesar Ritz's ghost, wandering hallways, checking standards, unable to rest because perfection is never finished. Others said it was grief made visible. The psychic residue of a man who poured everything into a building and received nothing back. The truth, as always, was less dramatic. Grief does not haunt buildings. Memory does. The Ritz-Carlton Boston was a place where dreams had died publicly, where fortunes evaporated, where a man's life work became his prison. Those stories saturated the walls. They did not need ghosts. They needed witnesses. And every guest who stayed there, every staff member who worked there, became a witness to the gap between what was promised and what was delivered. Cesar Ritz's will was modest. The Paris hotel had survived. It generated enough revenue to support Marie and their children. There was no fortune, no empire, just a name that would be licensed and sold and expanded until it meant everything and nothing. Until Ritz-Carlton became shorthand for luxury, without anyone remembering the man who almost destroyed himself creating it. Marie lived another 15 years. She never returned to Boston, never saw the hotel that killed her husband's mind. She kept his letters, his notes, his obsessive lists of guest preferences and service standards. After she died, the letters were archived. Scholars studied them. Hospitality students read them. And everyone marveled at the mind that could remember so much and still collapse under its own weight. The death without closure was not Cesar Ritz's. It was the hotel's. The building survived. The name thrived. But the connection between man and monument was severed. The Ritz-Carlton Boston was no longer his. It was no longer anyone's. It was just a place that existed, a 17-story reminder that perfection costs more than money. It costs the person who demands it, and sometimes it costs everything. The building that would not fall. Decades passed, yet the Ritz-Carlton Boston adapted while its founder faded from memory. The hotel survived the Depression by lowering expectations, not publicly, not in advertising, but in practice. Rooms cost $8 instead of $12. Occupancy climbed to 50% by 1937. Not enough to profit, enough to persist. And persistence during a depression was victory. World War II changed everything. Military contracts, government housing. Boston became a logistics hub for Atlantic convoys. The Ritz-Carlton housed officers, diplomats, contractors managing shipyards and munitions plants. Occupancy hit 80%, 90%. For the first time since opening, the hotel made money. But war profitability came with conditions. The government negotiated rates, $5 per night regardless of room size. The ballroom became a meeting space for procurement committees. The dining room served cafeteria-style meals to men in uniform who did not care about chandeliers. Luxury was suspended. Efficiency replaced elegance. The hotel that Cesar Ritz built to coddle aristocrats now functioned as a militarized boarding house. The staff adapted. The maids who once changed linens twice daily now changed them weekly. The kitchen that prepared 7-course meals now prepared stew in bulk. The doormen who greeted guests with rehearsed pleasantries now checked credentials and directed traffic. The war erased nuance. Everything became functional, and function, it turned out, was profitable. By 1945, the Ritz-Carlton Boston had erased its debt. Not all of it, but enough to matter. The hotel that nearly collapsed in 1930 now stood on solid financial ground. The war had done what peace could not. It had filled the rooms, generated revenue, proven that the building could survive if it abandoned the standards that nearly killed it. The post-war years brought a choice: return to luxury or embrace pragmatism. The operators chose luxury. Slowly, carefully, rooms were renovated. The dining room reinstated formal service. The ballroom hosted weddings again, but the prices stayed reasonable. The expectations stayed modest. The hotel learned that survival required compromise. Perfection was a trap. Good enough was sustainable. By 1955, occupancy averaged 78% at rates that covered costs and generated profit. The Ritz-Carlton Boston was no longer the most expensive hotel in America. It was not the most exclusive, but it was stable, reliable. A place where Boston society could gather without feeling like they were funding someone's impossible dream. The building itself aged well. Limestone weathers slowly, marble endures. The chandeliers were cleaned annually. The carpets replaced every decade. Maintenance costs were high but predictable. The hotel that once symbolized reckless ambition now symbolized careful stewardship. The transformation was complete, but the past lingered. Room 814 still unsettled guests. The ballroom still felt cold in corners that should not be cold. Staff still whispered. New employees were told the stories by older employees who had been told by employees now retired. The hauntings became tradition, part of the hotel's identity, not feared, not celebrated, just accepted. In 1973, the Ritz-Carlton Boston was sold again. A hotel management company bought it. Not the building, just the operations contract. They kept the name, upgraded the rooms, installed air conditioning, modernized the kitchen. The hotel entered the late 20th century as a functional, profitable business. The ghosts of its past were relegated to footnotes. By the 1980s, Cesar Ritz was a name in hospitality textbooks, a historical figure, the man who invented room service, who created the luxury hotel model. Students learned about his innovations, his standards, his influence. They did not learn about the breakdown, the bankruptcy, the sanatorium. Those details were inconvenient. History prefers heroes to cautionary tales. The Ritz-Carlton brand expanded globally. Hotels opened in dozens of cities. The name became a franchise, a promise of quality that had nothing to do with the man who invented it. The brand guidelines were strict: service standards, design aesthetics, guest experience protocols, all based on principles Cesar Ritz had developed, all executed by people who had never heard of him. The Boston Hotel became one property among many, not special, not unique, just another Ritz-Carlton in a portfolio of Ritz-Carltons. The building that had nearly destroyed its founder was now a reliable revenue stream. Occupancy stayed above 85%. Rates climbed with inflation. Renovations happened on schedule. The hotel was boring, profitable, exactly what it should have been from the beginning. In 2008, the building was landmarked, protected from demolition, recognized as historically significant architecture. The designation had nothing to do with Cesar Ritz. It was about the limestone facade, the ballroom's original chandeliers, the craftsmanship of 1920s construction. The man was gone. The building remained. And the building was what mattered. Today, the Ritz-Carlton Boston still operates, still books weddings, still hosts business conferences, still offers rooms at rates that would have horrified Cesar Ritz and delighted Edward Weiner. The hotel adapted, it survived. It outlasted everyone who built it and everyone who tried to destroy it. Limestone is patient, debt can be repaid, and buildings, unlike people, do not need closure to continue existing. Luxury learns the wrong lesson. Modern hospitality copied the image but forgot the warning. The Ritz-Carlton model became the template. 5-star service, attention to detail, staff trained to anticipate needs before guests articulated them. Hotels worldwide adopted the principles Cesar Ritz invented. They studied his methods, copied his systems, built empires on his blueprint. And almost none of them understood what the blueprint cost. The lesson the industry learned was about branding. A powerful name justifies premium pricing. Consistent standards build customer loyalty. Luxury is reproducible if you control every variable. These lessons were true. They were also incomplete. They ignored the part where Cesar Ritz lost his mind trying to maintain standards that required superhuman effort. Modern luxury hotels operate on algorithms, guest preference databases, automated systems that track room temperature, minibar consumption, and wake-up call requests. Technology replaced memory. Software replaced obsession. The result is efficient, profitable, and completely disconnected from the human cost that Cesar Ritz paid. The Ritz-Carlton Company, now owned by Marriott, operates over 100 properties globally. Annual revenue exceeds $4 billion. The brand is worth billions more. It succeeded by industrializing what Cesar Ritz did manually, by removing the founder's neuroses and keeping only the outcomes. This is smart business. It is also erasure. Hospitality schools teach Ritz's innovations without teaching his breakdown. Students learn about his customer service philosophy, his employee training programs, his design aesthetic. They do not learn that he died in a sanatorium, broken by the same standards he created. That lesson is inconvenient. It suggests that excellence requires sacrifice. And modern capitalism prefers systems to sacrifice. But the warning is there if anyone looks. Perfection is unsustainable. Control is an illusion. The gap between image and reality will eventually demand payment. Cesar Ritz tried to engineer luxury so precise that nothing could go wrong. He succeeded, and it destroyed him. The same trap awaits anyone who believes beauty can be controlled into permanence. The modern Ritz-Carlton brand advertises effortless elegance. Guests are promised an experience where every detail is managed, every need anticipated, every moment curated for maximum comfort. This is the fantasy Cesar Ritz sold, but the reality behind the fantasy is 740 staff members working to make magic look easy. It is invisible labor, exhausting labor, the kind that burns people out and replaces them before anyone notices. The industry calls this turnover, an acceptable cost of business. Staff leave. New staff are trained. The system continues. No individual is irreplaceable. This is the industrial model applied to hospitality. It works. It profits. It also guarantees that no one will ever care about the hotel the way Cesar Ritz cared about his. Because caring that much destroys you. The haunted reputation of luxury hotels persists, not because of ghosts, because of atmosphere. These are buildings designed to feel special, to create the sense that you are somewhere removed from ordinary life. Mystery is part of the product. The Ritz-Carlton Boston leans into it. Ghost tours, historical plaques, stories about the founder who built a palace and lost everything. Tourism commodifies tragedy, converts suffering into narrative, makes loss entertaining. But the real ghost is not Cesar Ritz. The real ghost is the belief that perfection is achievable, that if you just work hard enough, control enough variables, anticipate enough problems, you can create something flawless. That ghost haunts every luxury brand, every entrepreneur, every person who mistakes excellence for invincibility. The wrong lesson is that Cesar Ritz failed because he was fragile, because he could not handle pressure, because he lacked resilience. This is comforting. It suggests that someone stronger, smarter, more disciplined could have succeeded where he failed. But the truth is simpler. He failed because the goal was impossible. Perfection cannot be maintained. Systems cannot account for every variable, and human beings, no matter how driven, eventually break. The right lesson is that the Ritz-Carlton Boston should never have been built. Not at that scale, not at that cost, not with those expectations. It was a monument to hubris, disguised as ambition. And hubris always, eventually, sends a bill. But modern luxury has no use for that lesson. The industry grows. Brands expand. New hotels open, promising experiences even more exclusive, more curated, more perfect than the last. And behind every promise is the same machinery. Staff working too hard for too little. Systems stretched beyond capacity. Founders or executives gambling that growth will solve structural problems it cannot. The cycle continues because forgetting is profitable. Remembering is not. Cesar Ritz is remembered as a visionary, not as a warning. His breakdown is a footnote. His success is the headline. And every new generation of hoteliers studies the headline and ignores the footnote. They learn how to build luxury. They do not learn when to stop. What perfection finally costs. The hotel still stands, but its silence answers the question Cesar Ritz never could. Walk past the Ritz-Carlton Boston today, and you will see limestone that has weathered a century. You will see doormen in uniforms that echo 1927. You will see a building that survived the Depression, 2 world wars, and every economic crisis since. It looks permanent, solid, inevitable, as if it was always meant to be there and always will be. But permanence is a performance. The building stands because someone pays to maintain it, because engineers monitor the foundation, because accountants ensure revenue exceeds costs, because modern systems replaced the impossible standards that nearly destroyed it. The hotel learned what Cesar Ritz could not. That survival requires compromise. That perfection is the enemy of endurance. The cost of perfection is visible if you know where to look. Not in the ballroom chandeliers or the marble lobby, in the archive. In letters Cesar Ritz wrote before his mind collapsed. In medical records from the sanatorium, in bankruptcy filings from 1930, in the gap between what was promised and what was delivered. The cost is also visible in what the hotel became. A functional business, a profitable property, a brand that exists independent of passion or obsession. The Ritz-Carlton Boston is no longer anyone's dream. It is no longer anyone's nightmare. It is just a building, and maybe that is the mercy. Maybe buildings should outlive the people who destroy themselves creating them. Cesar Ritz wanted to build something flawless, something that would prove he was not the shepherd's son who got fired from his first job, something that would last. He succeeded. The building lasted, but he did not, and the building does not remember him. It cannot. Buildings have no memory. Only people do, and people forget. The guests who stay at the Ritz-Carlton Boston today know none of this. They book rooms online. They expect clean linens and hot water and staff who smile. They get those things. The hotel delivers, not because of Cesar Ritz, in spite of him. The system he created was refined, industrialized, stripped of the neuroses that made it impossible. What remains is effective. What was lost is the belief that hospitality requires personal sacrifice. Is the hotel haunted? Perhaps. Not by ghosts, by questions. What is the point of beauty if it destroys the person who creates it? What is the value of a legacy if the person who built it dies broken and forgotten? What does it mean to succeed if success looks like this? The building does not answer, it just stands. 17 stories of limestone and marble, and wiring updated every decade to meet code. It serves guests, employs staff, generates profit. It does what buildings do. It occupies space. It endures. It does not care that the man who gave it life lost everything because of it. The final cost of perfection is not financial. The Ritz-Carlton Boston eventually became profitable. The debt was repaid. The creditors were satisfied. The cost is existential. It is the knowledge that you can build something beautiful and have it taken from you, that you can dedicate your life to an ideal and watch that ideal outlive you without gratitude or memory. Cesar Ritz believed luxury could be engineered. He was right. But he also believed that control could be maintained forever. He was wrong. The gap between those two beliefs destroyed him. The hotel learned from his mistake. It let go of control. It accepted imperfection. It survived by becoming less than he demanded. And maybe that is the lesson. Not that perfection is achievable, but that the cost of pursuing it is too high. That buildings should serve people, not the other way around. That beauty is worthless if it requires human sacrifice. That legacy means nothing if the person who built it dies alone in a sanatorium, unable to remember their own name. The Ritz-Carlton Boston still stands. It will stand for decades more, centuries, maybe. Long after everyone who remembers Cesar Ritz is dead. Long after this story is forgotten, the building will remain, a monument to ambition, a warning about cost, a reminder that perfection is a trap, and the only escape is to stop demanding it. Walk past it today. Look up at the 17 stories. See the limestone, the gold letters, the doormen waiting to serve you, and know that beneath the beauty is a foundation built on loss. That every chandelier is a reminder of someone who gave everything and received nothing. That luxury is not effortless. It is invisible labor, invisible cost, invisible suffering. The hotel does not owe you this knowledge. It does not owe Cesar Ritz anything. It just stands, silent, patient, waiting for the next guest who will walk through its doors and see only beauty, who will never ask what beauty cost, who will sleep in rooms where a man's dream turned to nightmare and never know the difference. That is what perfection finally costs, everything. And in return, it gives you a building that does not remember your name.